Hello, my name is Andy Poe, and I build musical instruments, mainly mandolins and mandolas, and I've also done a couple ukuleles. Um, Today what I'd like to talk to you about is a new mando that I've developed with guitar players in mind. Over the years I've talked to quite a few different guitar players, and a lot of them have mentioned to me that they would like to take up the mandolin as a second instrument. That they like the mandolin, they like the way it sounds, and they'd like to incorporate it into some of their music. A couple other things that I've heard a lot from guitar players is that when they first pick up the instrument, just that it feels very small and very tight and cramped. Coming from guitar where you have quite a bit more space between the frets, more space between the strings, just by comparison, mandolin is a lot smaller. Me personally, mandolin was the first instrument I learned, and so it was quite the opposite, and that when I picked up a guitar, it felt huge and rather uncomfortable, and mandolin felt just right. So that's something that just takes some getting used to. Another thing that has stood out to me is that a lot of times guitar players, when they first take up the mandolin and try to start learning how to play it, they approach it by thinking the mandolin the same as guitar but upside down. And while that may help you figure out a few chords, that really probably isn't the best way to actually learn to play mandolin. So with these things in mind, I had an idea for a new mandolin style instrument that guitar players could pick up and feel more comfortable with a lot faster. So what I'm calling this instrument is the Mandoquin, and basically what it is what you would get if you crossed a mandola with a cavaquinho, or a cavaquillo is the way I guess you would pronounce it. The mandola is the larger sibling in the mandolin family, and is basically to the mandolin what the viola is to the violin in the violin family. It has a larger body, longer scale, and is tuned a fifth lower than mandolin. So you have a C, G, D, A instead of on mandolin the G, D, A, E. The cavaquillo is basically a small four-string guitar that I believe originated in Portugal and is the ancestor to the ukulele. But most often the cavaquillo uses wire strings instead of the Hawaiian style, which uses the nylon strings. Cavaquillo is typically played with a pick, and it does not use the reentrant tuning that you commonly find on the Hawaiian ukulele. So what I did is basically combine these two instruments and came up with the Mandoquin. Okay, so let's take a look at the Mandoquin. It's basically about the size of a mandola, and on these first ones I patterned them after the Gibson Army Navy style mandolins. This particular one I used spruce on the top, koa on the back and the sides, a mahogany for the neck, ebony on the headstock, ebony fingerboard, and it all bound in ivory binding. So basically what we have here is if you took the bottom four strings on a guitar from the player's perspective and capoed those strings of the guitar at the 5th fret. So in standard tuning on guitar, on those strings you would have D, G, B, E. On Mandoquin it being tuned a fourth higher, you have G, C, E, A. So if, for chords that you know on guitar, basically, let's just take a simple chord that most guitar players probably know, a G chord. On those strings you would have on the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd strings, you would play those open, and then on the 1st string you would fret the 3rd fret. So there on guitar you would have a G. On Mandoquin, being tuned a fourth higher, you have a C. Just by transposing, you can a G, A, B, C. So you have a C chord, and you could do that with all chords that you know simply by transposing up 1/4. All the chords that you know on guitar, you could apply them to the Mandoquin by doing that. Now the tuning of the Mandoquin, G, C, E, A, is also the same tuning that ukulele uses. Typically you'll find on a ukulele the G string being tuned an octave higher, and you get that reentrant tuning that the ukulele is well known for and gives it that unique sound. Some ukulele players will string it with a low G, but most commonly you find the higher G. Now regardless, all the chords are the same. So you could take, this being in the same tuning as ukulele, you could take all the chords, use chord charts, and use them for Mandoquin. So chords are really easy to find. Now you'll have to forgive me if you hear any buzzing or anything while I play. A few years ago I had an accident on a joiner and I lost the last little bone on these 3 fingers right here. And so I've got these weird fingers that kind of don't bend all the way around, and they're got kind of spongy fingertips there. So I'm much more of a builder than a player anymore, but I can get a few notes out of it. So I can assure you, if you hear any buzzing, it's not the instrument, it's just me. So guitar players could use a lot of the chords that they know, or ukulele players could pick this up quite easily and just apply what they know to this instrument, and it will feel very familiar. Scales, the same thing. You could use scale patterns that you know and use them here. So as you can see, the Mandoquin will feel very familiar to a guitar player. Okay, I'd like to show you another Mandoquin I have here. This one is quite similar to the other one. It also has a spruce for the soundboard, except on this one I use flame maple on the back and on the sides, and I used it also has flame maple for the neck. Ebony on the headstock, ebony fingerboard, same as the other one, and also fully bound and ivory binding. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the cavaquillo, just in case you're not familiar. The cavaquillo uses is commonly tuned DGBE, which is the same as guitar, but one octave higher. But probably a more common tuning is DGBD, where the E, the first string, is dropped one note. And this gives it an open G chord tuning. So just when you play all the strings open, you have a G chord. The same as on a 5-string banjo on the 4 full-length strings. Well, the same can be done on the Mandoquin by taking the first string and dropping it from an A to a G. So that's what I have this one tuned to. So we have G, C, E, G. And what that gives us is an open C chord. Banjo players could find this tuning quite useful because it'll be very familiar to them. So this can also be a useful instrument for banjo players, and the Mandoquin is actually quite punchy and quite loud. So with this being an open C chord, there's just a lot of movable chords in this tuning, and you can just bar chords. You have, from C, D, E, F, G, so that could be quite useful. And with it being pretty loud and punchy, you can play a lot of the bluegrass percussive chops just by barring chords or playing some of the different chords. Just to give you an example. So as you can see, this could be a very useful instrument to a banjo player as well, that might like to get a mando sound in their music. Okay, there's just a couple more things I'd like to share with you about the Mandoquin. The scale length on the instrument, that being from the nut to the saddle on the bridge, is 17 inches. This is about the same as you're going to find on a tenor size ukulele. Or I guess I should say ukulele. The width at the nut of the fingerboard is 1 3/8. That's about the same as on ukulele. It may be a little bit on the narrower side. Many will have a slightly wider nut. So it's not a chunky neck. But it definitely is a little bit wider than you're going to find on most mandolins or mandolas. Mandolin is typically about 1 1/8 of an inch, and mandola about 1 1/4 of an inch. So it's just a little bit wider, and that's to give the player just a little bit more room to play the types of chords that you're going to play on this instrument and the scale patterns. Mandolin, the narrower neck is actually good because it being tuned in fifths, the player needs to be able to cover more frets as they play up and down scales and cross between one string to the other. This being tuned in fourths and thirds, you don't need quite the reach. So a little bit more room makes a lot of the chords and playing scales, I think, a little bit more comfortable. Another cool thing about the longer neck is the ability to use a capo. Planet Waves makes a nice size capo for this instrument. I think they made them with banjos and ukuleles in mind. But they're great for musicians that want to be able to transpose their music from one key to another. And this one works good. So you can use this capo on this instrument, and the long neck, you can really go way up the neck. Using it at the 7th fret puts you pretty much back into just standard guitar tuning, because at the 7th fret you're back at D, G, B, E, but one octave higher. So and it even works pretty well all the way up at the 10th fret, and still sounds quite nice. Okay, now I think I'm just going to attempt to play a couple of songs for you, just so that you can kind of get a feel for the tone of the instrument. Okay, and just by the way, I'm just using your typical mandolin style pick. This is a Pro Plec 1.5 millimeter. Okay, so there you have it, Mandoquin. That's about all I have to say about it. Check back on the website for more photos, and also for upcoming instruments. I also have in the works a baritone sized Mandoquin that'll be a little larger, longer scale, and will be tuned the same as guitar, DGBE. So check back and check that out. So that's all I had. Thanks for viewing the video, and take care.